Thing to do about it.
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something good happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak.
Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the Briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the Briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Good morning, it's 9:30 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, here on your TV and your radio. Today, we're exploring the G20. What does it actually mean? Is it worthwhile? Is the Prime Minister achieving anything at all? And also, economic growth. It's the question at the heart of economic decisions. It means whether or not we have to raise taxes, cut spending. It focuses in on that Thursday statement. Well, what are we doing about economic growth in the United Kingdom? Could we be doing more to make ourselves richer? That, and the Mayor of London is demanding more powers over rents in London. Should the government give it to him? We'll explore it all after the headlines.
Very good morning, 9:31. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. The Prime Minister has called on Russia to get out of Ukraine and end this barbaric war, blaming the conflict for worsening global economic challenges. Rishi Sunak, who's condemned the Russian president for not attending the G20 summit in Bali, says the weaponisation of energy and food is totally unacceptable. Addressing world leaders, including China's Xi Jinping, Mr Sunak also said the UK would stand ready to support Taiwan in standing up to Chinese aggression. He describes China as representing the biggest state-based threat to our economic security. The rate of UK unemployment rose to 3.6% from July to September. The ONS says that's up 0.1% from the previous 3 months. Well, they reported economic pressures were a factor in employers holding back on recruitment, with the biggest driver behind the fall coming from hospitality. Economist Jack Kennedy says poor economic activity in the market was to blame. A group of major supermarkets have called on the Education Secretary to expand the free school meal scheme. The shops, as well as chefs Jamie Oliver and Tom Kerridge, have co-written a letter urging the government to extend the scheme to all children in England whose families receive universal credit. The retailers are warning of rising food costs in the coming months, and they're calling on Westminster to do more to protect children and help struggling parents. The Prince of Wales has visited the England football team at their training ground ahead of the World Cup tournament in Qatar. Prince William met the team privately, including the captain Harry Kane and the manager Gareth Southgate at St George's Park in Staffordshire last night. He presented them with their shirts and told them the whole country is behind them. The competition kicks off this weekend. We're on your TV, we're online and your DAB+ radio. It's GB News. Now let's head back to Tom for The Briefing.
A very good morning to you. It's 9:33 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Well, first today, the Prime Minister is, of course, at the G20 in Bali, where, as we all slept, he delivered a speech to fellow world leaders. Addressing in particular the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, Rishi Sunak said the country must end its illegal occupation of Ukraine and get out of Ukraine and end this barbaric war. But the Prime Minister will face questions over perhaps softening his stance on China, and he hinted he will ditch his plans of declaring China a threat. Well, I'm joined now by Catherine Forster, our political reporter outside Downing Street, with more on what the Prime Minister is up to. And let's start off with this direct confrontation, one might say, of the Russian Foreign Minister.
Yes, obviously Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, is there in place of Vladimir Putin, who decided not to show, unsurprisingly, given the fact that they have invaded their neighbour Ukraine, and the world is pretty much united in condemning that. Rishi Sunak very keen to take a tough line, as his predecessors Liz Truss and very notably Boris Johnson did with this, stressing that the person that has the power to change this is Vladimir Putin himself, stressing that the rest of the world must be united, that Britain is behind Ukraine, will give them whatever support they need for as long as it takes. Volodymyr Zelensky was also addressing the G20 via Zoom. He noticeably said, "Dear G19," very overtly excluding Russia from that. So this summit is taking place at a time of huge international tensions. It's the first time, of course, that these world leaders have met since Russia invaded Ukraine earlier in the year, and lots of divisions, lots of tensions. But the Prime Minister very keen to take a tough line on the world stage. Of course, he was at COP27 only just over a week ago, but this is really his first big outing on the world stage. He'll be meeting President Joe Biden tomorrow.
I suppose a big part of his attendance of the G20, at least how it's being presented to people here at home, will be in the context of the global economic challenges that we are all facing. The fact that a third of the world is sliding into recession. How does this all play into the autumn budget we're expecting on Thursday?
Yes, he is stressing, of course, that the Russian invasion of Ukraine has sent energy prices soaring, has sent food prices soaring, that this is having a massive impact globally and indeed in Britain, and will have a big impact in decisions that the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt and Prime Minister Rishi Sunak are going to be announcing on Thursday. Now, there's Treasury questions at 11:30 today. They will be ranging from everything to supporting families with energy bills, with mortgage costs, to levelling up, to regulation on small businesses. But looking forward, as we've heard again and again and again, eye-wateringly difficult decisions, as the Chancellor says, coming on Thursday. £55 billion of spending cuts, tax rises, 3 freezes to thresholds. And we're hearing this morning that council tax is likely to rise to help to fund social care. Of course, the national insurance levy that was destined to, well, not destined as it turned out, to help to fund social care was one of the things that was ditched by Liz Truss in that spectacularly disastrous mini budget just a few weeks ago. So it looks now like councils may be allowed to put council tax up by up to 5%, up from 2.99%. That will mean that the average council tax is likely to go over £2,000. Also, we're hearing some good news for pensioners, not confirmed, of course, till Thursday, but it does look likely that the triple lock will be maintained, that pensions will rise in line with inflation. The energy price freeze, we know, is due to end in April. It sounds like after that it will be much more targeted to the people who really need it the most. But suggestions that the current cap of around £2,500 is likely to rise to over £3,000 from April. So certainly the cost of living crisis is only set to get worse as these tax rises begin to bite and inflation is still at around 10%. But of course, the government are stressing that they have to act responsibly with the nation's finances. They have to prove that they have a plan, and more than anything, they are keen to get inflation down, because inflation at 10% is making all of us poorer.
And now just finally, briefly, if you will, the former Environment Secretary George Eustice has been making a bit of a splash in the last day, speaking in the Commons out against the trade deal that this country signed with Australia. What's he been saying?
Yes, now that George Eustice is liberated from being Minister for the Environment and on the back benches, he is free to speak as he wishes. And basically he said that the deal that was signed, the trade deal signed with Australia, was not very good at all, despite the rhetoric that we heard at the time. He's basically said that the good bits are attributable to the Department of the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, but the bad bits are at the foot of the Department of Trade. Now, of course, Liz Truss led that. We hear that she was very keen to get it across the line, that she'd basically asked what was needed to get it by a certain date, and Australia said what was needed, and we, according to George Eustice, gave away far too much. So I think food for thought with trade deals going forward, maybe.
Although of course, I suppose many people would say
to get a better deal.
What George Eustice might say is a concession to Australia, consumers in this country might well say, well, that's cheaper goods for consumers. There's always that battle within trade deals. I suppose there's that eternal battle within the Conservative Party as well, between the free marketeers and perhaps the protectionists. But Catherine Forster, thank you for bringing us all of that from outside Downing Street. Please do get in from the cold and the wet as well. At least the Prime Minister is sunning himself in Bali rather than having to put up with that weather that you are in Downing Street today. Well, moving on to our next story today. Britain isn't growing. Well, not as fast as it should be by any means. Today, the typical British family is around £7,000 worse off than the typical German family. It's around £14,000 worse off than a typical American family. These are extraordinary numbers and haven't always been the case. The short-lived Liz Truss administration really got this fact. Their diagnosis was correct. However, clearly the treatment, or the proposed treatment at least, was a little bumpy. So to really solve this question of growth, cross-party solutions are necessary, ones that can carry a coalition of support. But how might a pro-growth coalition be built? Well, a new campaign has launched this week. It's called Britain Remade. It's working to find out what is really holding Britain back and exploring how a new coalition for growth could potentially be built. Well, I'm pleased to be joined by Sam Richards, the CEO of Britain Remade, a former Downing Street advisor as well. And first of all, what is the impetus behind this new campaign launching right now?
So we think, Britain Remade is a campaign for people who think that Britain is a great country, that we are the country who built the world's first railway, split the atom, built the world's first commercial nuclear power plant. But unfortunately, we've stopped building. It's been 27 years since we built a new nuclear power station in this country. And this failure to build new sources of clean energy, new railways, new transport links, and enough new houses is making us all poorer. Exactly as you said in your introduction. The average British family is now poorer than the average German family, poorer than the typical American family, but by the end of this decade is set to be poorer than the average Polish family on current trajectories. We don't think that this is inevitable. We think that there are policy levers that we can pull, and we think that if we deal with our broken planning system, we can build these new sources of energy, these new transport links, these new houses that will get us back on track.
Why is it that no one has really got this fact in government until this stage? We often hear about politicians saying we should build new power stations. We're boasting about how many houses have been built. But then when it comes to the particular, planning reform has been defeated twice in the last 10 years. And similarly, as you say, no new nuclear power stations for 27 years. What is holding this back at a political level?
I mean, I think governments have made steps in the right direction. And if you look at the work that the Boris Johnson government did, for example, on cutting the amount of time it takes to build new offshore wind farms, progress has been made, but it's clear from the energy bills that we're paying at the moment, from the cost of property, that progress hasn't been made. And I think what we want to do with Britain Remade is give that voice to, we think, the millions of voters who would support that pro-growth agenda.
And what evidence do you have that there is a sort of pro-growth coalition out there, to perhaps lift an opposite phrase from the former Prime Minister? The fact that perhaps there are these quiet voters who do want to see this kind of development and progress in Britain?
Well, I spent the last 3 months talking to people across the country, talking to businesses, and there has been huge support for exactly these pro-growth policies, these supply-side policies. But it's also borne out in polling. We commissioned polling over the research over the weekend, and this research showed that a majority of voters would support new solar farms, would support new wind farms, if they benefited from cuts in bills, which they should, as the cheapest sources of power. So there is support for these pro-growth policies out there.
But crucially, we live in fractious political times. Parties are bubbling up and down. Currently, the Labour Party has a substantial lead in the polls. How important is it to create these policy proposals that all parties can support moving forward, that can sustain a coalition even if the government changes?
Yeah, it's absolutely vital. And I think what's been really interesting is over recent months you've seen almost a consensus building across politics. Yes, of course, Liz Truss's government focused on growth, as I know that Rishi's is as well. And you've seen Keir Starmer's Labour Party making clean growth a centrepiece of their agenda, and even nodding towards planning reforms in his conference speech. So you are starting to see this across the political spectrum, and it makes sense because we know that if you want to cut bills, if you want to reduce our energy dependence on imported expensive foreign gas, and if you want good jobs here in the UK, we need to start building these new industries here in Britain.
It is remarkable that so many of these solutions that you propose are literally free. They don't cost the taxpayer anything at all. In fact, all they need to do is get the government out of the way, stop inhibiting the private sector, if you will, creating that investment, that progress, that building. I suppose because it just looks so obvious in policy terms, clearly it's going to be more difficult than that. There are vested interests who do not want things being built in this country. How do you combat that sentiment?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think by making the case and by setting out clearly that these new industries, that building new wind and solar, building new nuclear, building new houses, building new roads, you can make it. It is clear now that these will cut your energy bills, that these will deliver good new jobs in this country, and that they will make us more energy independent. And I think by focusing on the clear industrial benefits from these policies, I'm hopeful that we can build a broad coalition to deliver the policies that we need to get us back on track.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing your campaign as it develops, and indeed the research that you're carrying out. Really, really fascinating stuff. Thank you there, Sam Richards, CEO of Britain Remade. Well, next today, London Mayor Sadiq Khan is this week demanding new powers from the government. Yes, the London Mayor is saying that he wants the power to control rent across the London boroughs. Indeed, the Mayor said earlier this week that London's private renters are facing a triple whammy, with rising rents, bills and the cost of household essentials putting a major strain on their finances. But should the Mayor be given powers in this area? And particularly, are government limits on the amount that private businesses are allowed to charge for their services the right solution here? Well, I'm delighted to be joined by Tony Devendish, a Conservative London Assembly member. Tony, thank you for joining me this morning. Firstly, of course, you are a Conservative member of the London Assembly. No doubt you would be opposed to many proposals that the current mayor might be making. But potentially there may well be a future Conservative mayor. Isn't it reasonable that the devolved mayors of this country might be given more powers over these areas?
Absolutely, Tom. Good morning. Absolutely happy for the Mayor and mayors across the country to have more powers. But let's talk about this specific proposal, because this is just Mr. Khan at his most irresponsible. The way this came about is because when Jeremy Corbyn was leader of the Labour Party, Khan was trying to be seen to be hard left. And he came up with this policy of a way of basically saving his own skin within the eternal Labour Party. The reality is, as you know, in Berlin, in Ireland, and in Scotland, this policy, when implemented, has made renters' life and the economy far, far worse. It's basic, any of your viewers will know this, it's supply and demand. All this does, it drives people out of renting their properties to people. It causes a disaster. And at a time where we're in a cost of living crisis, the last thing we need is rents going up even more, which they would if you regulated them in the way that Sadiq Khan wants to do. This is purely a Labour Party politics. It's got nothing to do with the very serious cost of living crisis that we are all facing. And it's completely irresponsible. But as you said at the beginning of the item, the good news is Mr. Khan hasn't got the power to do this. This is just him talking to what he considers is left of his own party. It's not going to happen, so your viewers shouldn't be worried.
It's funny when we're talking about something like rent control. On the face of it, it sounds like it would control rents. It sounds like a very easy solution to a pretty tricky problem. But I suppose if we look at the question of supply and demand, which you rightly raise, at the moment, there are far more people looking for accommodation in London than there are units of accommodation available for rent. And if there are limits on what potential landlords could charge for their properties, fewer of those properties would be on the market. The supply and demand problem would become even more exaggerated. Is this you, Tony Devendish, saying that there needs to be more building in London in order to assuage that supply and demand question?
Exactly, Tom. There's only two ways that you can improve things. One is to encourage existing homeowners or building owners to actually rent their property out. And the way to do that is not to bring in this ridiculous policy. But the other way, absolutely. And actually, the 1945 Labour government and the Macmillan Conservative government knew this in the 1950s. You have to build more homes. So actually, what's Mr. Khan done in 6 years as mayor? Well, he's actually had a lot of money from the government to build affordable housing because we need to do that in London. In fact, he's had £5 billion in his first term to build 116,000 social houses. And at the moment, 2 years after the original programme should have been completed, he hasn't even started 25,000 of those 116,000. Mr. Khan is always great at issuing press releases. He's never very good at actually delivering, as we know from his record on crime, his record on housing, and his record on transport.
You touched upon the case studies of rent control being introduced in Ireland and in Berlin in particular. What do those show us over the last few years?
Well, I've got the figures in front of me for Berlin. When Berlin brought this ridiculous policy in, supply literally went down 41%. I mean, I think that sums it up, really. The reality is no landlord is going to rent their property out if they're going to have the inability to actually pay their mortgage. And Mr. Khan actually got caught on one of your competitors' TV programme yesterday where he said, oh, people won't have any trouble paying their mortgage if they're renting their property out, basically. It's crazy. All he is going to do, if he had the power, I stress to any of your viewers that have come in during this item, Sadiq Khan doesn't have the power to do this crazy policy. But if he did, and if a future Labour government brought in rent controls, it would absolutely destroy the housing market across the country. And the reality is the people that will really be hurt will be the most vulnerable and those that are renting. Those people literally will be paying far more because there'll be far fewer properties. It's that simple. Only a socialist like Mr. Khan would think that supply and demand doesn't work.
It's remarkable when put out that clearly that this is even considered. I believe it was a famous Swedish socialist economist who said not that long ago that there are the only way more surefire to destroy the housing stock of a city other than bombing was indeed this policy proposed by the London mayor. It's a fascinating case study, and as you say, clearly no power in his hands to do it right now. And I don't doubt from your comments this morning that this Conservative government is unlikely to be handing that power over to Mr. Khan anytime soon. For now, Tony Devonish, the Conservative London Assembly member, thank you so much for joining us on the briefing this morning. Really interesting stuff there in terms of what the London mayor is up to. Good to keep an eye on it. But that's it for the programme from me today. Coming up, it's Bev Turner with Bev Turner Today after this.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. More wind and rain on the way this morning. And later on for northeastern areas, heavy rain in places, but brighter skies will follow in the west later. Areas of low pressure still dominating our weather at the moment. Those areas of low pressure sitting to the northwest, swinging at first an active band of rain in a weather front, which is likely to cause a few issues across southern counties of England and South Wales as the rainfall accumulates to 30 or 40 millimetres in places. The wettest weather moving out of the way of these areas, though, pushing into the east of England, northern England, central and eastern Scotland by the afternoon. And once again, that will build up over some of the higher parts of eastern Scotland, Aberdeenshire, Angus, Perth and Kinross, likely to see 50 to 60 millimetres in places. That could cause some issues. Brighter skies, though, return to the west, 13 or 14 Celsius in the south, 11 or 12 in the north. And Northern Ireland sees a lovely afternoon, but for Wales and the southwest, any gaps between the rain short-lived because further showers arrive here. Those showers spreading across most of the UK by the end of Wednesday, but the more persistent wet weather in the northeast, well, that lingers across Shetland, where the winds will really be ramping up during Tuesday and into Wednesday, gales or even severe gales. Otherwise, it's a blustery start for many on Wednesday. Some gaps in between the showers and some sunshine first thing. A fresher start for many, but not exactly cold. And we're going to see further showers arriving from the west and southwest through the day. So there's going to be frequent showers along the south coast for parts of Wales, western Scotland as well. But away from those showers, for many it's a fine afternoon. There'll be some sunshine out there, certainly looking brighter and drier compared with recent days. But for Shetland, we keep the very strong winds and the heavy rain. It will stay windy here throughout much of the rest of the week. Elsewhere, there'll be further spells of rain, followed by showers, followed by more rain. It will be blustery at times, and also temperatures will be coming down.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week. I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Are authorities, are communities doing all they can to combat violent crime? With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. There's never been a more interesting but also critical time in British politics, and I can't wait to bring you the biggest stories of the day with the best factual accuracy and also a few of my own opinions thrown in. We'll engage in passionate but always polite debate with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12 on TV, on radio and online.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
On the Mark Stein Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Stein Show.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
On radio and online.
we're proud to be
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning. Welcome to Bev Turner Today on GB News. We've got 2 hours of the top stories which affect your life with punchy interviews and sofa debates with forthright guests. First up, the NHS has a 7.1 million people waiting list, and yet staff are threatening to strike. Shouldn't they be just working longer hours, not less? That's our Twitter poll, so get voting. We're going to be debating that as Health Secretary Steve Barclay meets with unions today. Reform leader Richard Tice is going to be here in the studio as his party snaps at the heels of the Greens. We've got the latest from Russia as well, and I am very excited that YouTube superstar Dr. John Campbell will be here in the studio. He is an understated nurse lecturer from Cumbria. You may not know who he is, but he's now got 2.5 million subscribers to his very basic videos. He's unwittingly become a